Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see you all here. Today we'll be talking about body safety, particularly how to protect children from child sexual abuse. This training is scheduled for 2 hours. We'll be taking a break midway through. But during that time, please just take care of yourselves while we're going through this. As we're doing our training, feel free to raise your hand or mute yourselves and ask questions or drop some questions in the chat if you need to. Our learning objectives for today. So by the end of today's course, you should be able to define some key concepts related to typical and atypical sexual development in preschool-aged children, analyze how adults' attitudes and their belief systems about child sexual development influence children and their ability to disclose unsafe experiences, develop a plan to integrate body safety and child abuse prevention strategies into daily interactions with children in the home, the school, and other community settings. And finally, having the ability to apply body safety strategies to promote healthy boundaries and help children identify safe and trusted adults. We're going to be going over the definition and scope of the issue, followed by the components of development, go over some of the atypical and typical child sexual expression. We'll talk about some difficulties in recognizing sexual abuse, our attitudes and responsiveness towards children. And then towards the end, we'll cover prevention programming, and then we'll put it all together as we wrap up. So, what is child sexual abuse? Well, there's various definitions of what that means. And so a couple of them are that sexual violence is defined as any deliberate, unwanted, and non-essential sexual act that's either completed or attempted that is perpetrated against a child that results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, pain, or emotional suffering. Goes on to say that child sexual abuse, or CSA, also includes the omission of caregiving duties or physically, psychologically, or sexually abusive acts towards a person under 18, and a sexually abusive acts that's any coercion, encouragement, or persuasion of a minor to take part in a sexual act. Sexual abuse includes non-contact and contact. Non-contact could be sexual jokes, exhibitionism, voyeurism, exposure to porn, unwanted sexting, stalking, or grooming. And contact is being forced to be involved in sexual touching or forced intercourse. So to have an act to be considered child sexual abuse, there are generally 4 factors that are included. First, the target person has to be a child where there's no true consent. That act is being done to seek sexual gratification for the abuser or another person, which could be immediate or deferred. Like if there's like some pictures or videos or things that are being taken of children. And this act occurs in the context of a relationship which there is any type of power inequality that is used to exploit that child's vulnerability. Child sexual abuse is not just a community problem. This is a worldwide issue. Across the world, there have been research and studies regarding child sexual abuse. There are some like long-term and short-term impacts to child sexual abuse. The research says that there are about 60 to 80% of victims having short-term symptoms like anxiety, hostility, distrust, feelings of guilt for being victimized, and stigmatization. Some of the longer term impacts that may go on throughout adulthood include depression, anxiety, sexual problems, increased risk of substance abuse, unwanted pregnancies, and STIs. Some of the physical symptoms that are related to child sexual abuse include having a reduced immune system, being very hyper aroused, which increases your stress levels, and that leads to an increased risk of cardiovascular problems and other diseases. PTSD, suicide, depression, problematic sexual behavior, problems with academic performance, physical health, and intimate partner relationships are also difficult with people who have experienced child sexual abuse. When we're talking about true consent, in California specifically, the age of consent is 18. So we do know that children do have sex under 18, or people do have sex under the age of 18. However, there has to be a developmental awareness of that. So it is based on your age and your development. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. When we're looking at the components of development in general, good development, or excuse me, normative development includes having good health, adequate nutrition, responsive parenting, learning opportunities, and safety and security. We'll be looking specifically at safety and security as it relates to preventing child sexual abuse. Safety is described as a state in which one is protected from unintentional human errors. And security is when a child is protected from hazards that result from deliberate human acts or behavior that are intended to cause. So these are different. So safety is could be from fires or car accidents, but security is when there is maybe a threat from another person and you're provided safety and security from that threat. The nurturing care for early childhood development framework really talks a little bit more about what safety and security are for children. They also state that being safe and secure is not just the responsibility of parents, but it's the responsibility of extended family members, the community, and the governments. There are 4 points that this framework covered in terms of children being safe and secure. Sensitizing and educating caregivers, empowering the community to practice various strategies, the building up of supportive services in our communities by really talking about how can we prevent injuries, neglect, and maltreatment, and as well as equipped medical staff like pediatricians to be able to recognize and manage those possible threats. And then an overarching enabling of governmental organizations to have policies, procedures, legislation, and child welfare services in place to receive and investigate and intervene where there is possible sexual abuse in homes and also in other settings. We'll be asking several questions in the chat. So our first one is about safety and security. Maybe thinking about when you were a child or as you're caring for a child, maybe we can talk about some ways that you've provided or have been provided safety and security in your life. So if you can just drop some things in the chat, we can see what you think is considered safety and security. Okay, let's see. Not having sleepovers, being able to have and express loud your feelings, honesty from parents, secrets don't make friends, okay. Having consistency within your caregivers, making sure your parents knew where you were, supporting and validating experiences, not being forced to say hi, parental supervision, respecting, validating feelings, see a lot of that, checking in on me. Yes, respecting for personal space, being able to express yourself, yes. Role modeling. Oh yeah, this is a good one. Yeah, talking to children about natural disasters and emergency planning. Not having sleepovers again. Right, talking to them about their bodies and their real names of body parts and how their body works. Yes, absolutely. And speaking of that, as we're looking at development, we may not have so much awareness that just like physical development, emotional and social development, but children also experience child sexual development throughout the lifespan. Sexual development in children between the ages of 0 and 6 involves exploration, awareness, and curiosity. We'll be going over a couple of child development theorists. Sigmund Freud, he created the psychosexual stages of development. Well, Sigmund Freud said that the child's focus for sexual development is the focus on pleasure and pleasure-seeking urges called erogenous zones. He had various stages of development, including oral, anal, and phallic, and those are the three that we'll be covering today. And then he went on to have latency and genital. And those are a little bit for older children. Erik Erikson was his protege, and so he worked under Freud, and he also came up with developmental crises. But Erikson's stages of development went throughout the lifespan. So he said that not only do we don't stop growing and developing as just when we turn 18, but we continue throughout our life. The developmental stages of Erikson that is covered in our training today include trust versus mistrust, which is like birth to 18 months, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt. But then he went on to say, but even after that, there is identity and role confusion, trying to figure out like, who am I, where do I belong, intimacy versus isolation. That's really about how people engage in relationships and finding partners. Generativity and stagnation in middle adulthood, the time that, we're most in our vigorous careers, and are we moving forward? Are we stagnant? And then after we're done working, integrity versus despair. As we look back onto our lives and what did we say we have accomplished things, or are we in despair about not being able to meet the things that we wanted to do in our lives? So I really embrace that development does happen throughout the lifespan and doesn't just stop when we physically stop developing. The first stage of child sexual development is exploration. From 0 to 1, it's where children are involved in the oral stage. Freud said that in this stage, pleasure is focused on the mouth from sucking. The major conflict, so each developmental stage, whether we're talking about Freud or Erikson, involves a conflict that needs to be resolved. And that conflict is resolved by adequate responsiveness from their caregivers. In the oral stage, the major conflict is being weaned off of the breast or the bottle. If a child is weaned off too early or too late, this may result in various fixations that seek to reduce anxiety. Some of those things in adults could be smoking or overeating, overeating or over drinking, or even biting their nails. In the anal stage, Freud said this was between the ages of 1 and 3. He said the pleasure here is associated with the anus. Some of the major conflicts in this is focused around toilet training. Kids experience that pleasure when they're in their bowel and bladder movements. The parents and caregivers who offer praise and reward and encourage positive results can help children feel safe and competent. But parents who are harsh and do not provide that positive feedback, those children can develop what Freud called anal retentive personalities, which can be stingy and stubborn, or they may need order and neatness and may be even considered a perfectionist. And if parents are too lenient, a child could become what he called anal expulsive, meaning that they're messy, careless, disorganized, and prone to emotional outbursts. During infancy, we see that children are even physically capable of becoming erect or have an erect penis or a lubricated vagina even before birth. This arousal is not attached to sexual gratification, but it's meant to say that they may be content with their feeding being warm. Infants, as soon as they're able to reach and touch their bodies, they will also touch their genitals. to provide comfort, to relieve tension, and it is not to reach orgasm. So we'll talk a lot about how children's behaviors, um, as adults, we may associate some children's behaviors of that exploration, curiosity, as sexual gratification when they're really just becoming aware and noticing and learning about their bodies. So from exploration, we have awareness. The phallic stage, what Freud talked about the phallic stage, he referenced the Oedipus and Electra complex. In this, he said that, for instance, for the Oedipus complex, that when we're talking about he focused on heterosexual male and female parents. So he was very particular in focusing on that. And he said the Oedipus complex is when the son looks at his father as a rival in terms of getting attention from his mother, and that tension, that conflict is not resolved until he starts to identify with his father, or identify his father in his place, and that reconciles that tension between his father and himself. There's like a competition. And similarly, he said the Electra complex, which, by the way, Freud came up with this Electra complex, and then he said, actually, it didn't apply. He threw it out, but then researchers after him, by that point, that the cat was already out of the bag, and researchers already took his information and ran with it. So the Electra complex is where we get, if y'all ever heard something called penis envy. The Electra complex is when the daughter has a conflict with their mother, and really mad at her because she didn't give her a penis. And so there's penis envy. And then there's the reconciliation for that happens when the female child also starts to identify with the mother, and she becomes less combative with the mother and more like, okay, now I want to emulate her and be like her. There are some problems with Freud's theories because he talked specifically about, he actually sexualized the exploration and the curiosity of early childhood sexual development. And this may have led to what we now have is a possible over-sexualization of children by adults, and leading to victim blaming. So we may see certain behaviors, and we may believe that a child is being sexual or over-sexualized if they're touching themselves, or looking at some nude body, when in fact it's about awareness, exploration, and curiosity. Curiosity. Curiosity, this stage is between the ages of 3 and 6. What we see a lot in this stage of curiosity is self-stimulation is pretty common. Toddlers are also very curious about their body and the bodies of others, and it's natural for them to show their genitals to siblings and to peers, to take off their clothes, and to even touch each other. From the ages of 3 and 6, children become more aware of their bodies, and it could lead to peer sexual play. Now, peer sexual play at this age is quite common. Parents have reported between 50 and 85% of kids engaging in some sort of fantasy sexual play or exposure or stimulation of their genitals. Children at this age may also enjoy being nude, whether it's in public or in private. They may lack modesty if see kids running around and they're laughing and joking and they have all their clothes off and they don't want to put their clothes on. That's very typical normative sexual development in children. Also showing their private parts to familiar people. And you'll also see children being curious when family members are undressing, bathing, or toileting. They'll be like, well, what's that? They'll look at a breast. What is that? They'll point out a penis. What is that? So when we're talking about child sexual behaviors, we'll talk about typical and atypical behavior. So typical high frequency behavior includes behaviors that are not overtly sexual. The play and exploration generally occurs with children around the same age and size. You see this as you would see it as more spontaneous or playful and exploratory rather than something that is a planned act. Here, children do not really have a occupation with sexual interactions. This is something that occurs infrequently. These behaviors are not hostile or aggressive or hurtful to the child of others. And the behaviors are easily diverted when the parents or caregivers tell the children to stop or planning or explain privacy rules. So when the child is you may have a child or be in contact with a child who is doing some type of exploration or not being modest in public. And when we redirect that child, they take that in and they stop that behavior. So that's one of the signs of a child who is having some normative, typical sexual behavior. Some of the atypical or low frequency child sexual behaviors in children 0 to 6 include rubbing their body against others in a sexually stimulating way. When they go to kiss you, inserting their tongue, touching other people's genitals, imitating sex acts, continuation of masturbating or touching genitals of themselves or others, even after adult redirection. Frequent patterns of a variety of sexual behaviors. Requesting others to engage in specific sex acts. And some sexual behaviors that cause emotional or physical pain. When children are having possibly peer-to-peer body exploration, generally, because it's in a playful way, they are, unless an adult says that it's a shameful act, they will not inherently feel that it is shameful. They will think that it's just play. That one child is not forcing another child to engage in any of this exploration. This is not forced or coerced. Some other atypical low frequency behaviors include having an advanced knowledge of sex. This is based on their age and development. Inserting objects or fingers in their genitals, imitating sexual intercourse, touching animals' genitals, planned or intrusive sexual behavior, any mouth to genital contact, attempting to have intercourse with others, and then, as I stated before, coercing others to engage in sexual behavior. So now that we have some type of an overview of the scope, some of the definitions of child sexual abuse, what we consider to be safe and secure, Some points on child's development between these ages of 6 to 12. We reviewed already the typical and atypical behaviors in children. Now we'll be talking about how we feel about that expression. So in the chat, maybe write some possible difficulties that we may have of talking with children as they express this part of their development. So thinking back, if you see in your, if you see children do behaviors being exploratory and frequent, what are some possible difficulties that could come up when we're engaging with children and we're seeing them doing their exploratory sex acts? What could be some issues that may come up that may be difficult about talking with children? Okay, using language and words that they understand. Right, the adults could be embarrassed. Possible shaming, making the child feel uncomfortable. Not being able to have the right language. Yes, adults overreacting and triggered by their own experience. Yes, in fact, parents, mothers specifically who have been sexually abused, either become hyper vigilant or turn a blind eye when a child is their child has talked about disclosure. Yeah, having the right terminology. Feeling shameful. Yeah, I was working, I'm also a psychotherapist, and I was working with one client, and they were sexually abused as a child, and they were caring for their one of their family members, and this young family member who was about 5 or 6 went to went to their caregiver, and they pointed to their caregiver's breast or some of their private parts, and the caregiver was like, "Oh no, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about those parts." And I explained to the client, I was like, well, if you don't allow your child to talk to you about these parts, then how can they feel safe and comfortable telling you if something happened? Right. Some other things about supporting children to be expressive. Parents may not understand. Patricia, thank you for sharing and being open here. Right, allowing the child to describe their experiences in their own words. So the research says some difficulties in recognizing sexual abuse include some risk factors. We're going to talk about culture. And then, yes, a lot what I see in the chat here is about adult attitudes and the responsiveness. Adult attitudes and responsiveness matters in the protection of child safety. Okay, so what are some of the risk factors? So research says that failing to report child sexual abuse when it occurs may be related to the victim believing that they're in a real and loving relationship with the perpetrator. So what they're saying is that some children or children who are not aware of the possibility of sexual abuse may not even know that they're involved in a sexually abusive relationship. Some other research talked about some barriers in terms of their parents' economic lifestyle. There was one farmer a full-time farmer, entrepreneur, and he said that he doesn't have time to talk to his children because he goes to work very early before they wake up, and he gets home late after, so that he doesn't even have a chance to have these conversations with their children. They say about less than 30%, 30% of children were even aware that they needed to have a verbal response to stop a bad touch. One of the things that we can teach our children is having a verbal response when they're feeling uncomfortable. Research says even just screaming or yelling when a touch on their private part occurs outside of the normal caregiving responsibilities. Only 16% of children surveyed in this study responded that it should be reported when private, excuse me, when private parts are touched. So 16% of children, only 16% of children who were surveyed in this particular study said that, yes, I'm supposed to tell somebody that my private parts were touched. So this comes from a real lack of awareness of knowledge on children, which thereby means that us as caregivers, as professionals, how can we support our children in having knowledge about consent? Broadly, some individual risk factors and um, some of the risk factors include some individual risk factors include school attending youth. Youth serving organizations are the second highest place where risky place where children are at risk of child sexual abuse. Street involved youth, children in the child welfare system are also at higher risk. Transgender youth, the age of the victim, so younger children up to the age of around 12 are more at risk of sexual abuse. Sexual orientation is a risk factor, disability status. Some relationship factors include family dysfunction and child maltreatment, adolescent dating violence, and then on the community level, community violence, technology, and we'll be talking about how technology also could be a breeding ground for child sexual abuse. When we talk about culture, when we think of child sexual abuse, generally the population assumes that only females or only females are sexually abused. A lot of times when we're looking at culture, or when we're looking at child sexual abuse, we don't consider boys or children with penises as possible victims of child sexual abuse. And there is a lot of research done specifically on protecting children with penises from child sexual abuse, and some of the reasons why they may be overlooked. And boys, it's stated that masculinity, the norms around masculinity contribute to boys not self-identifying as victims. So boys are less likely to say that they're victims of child sexual abuse because of a fear of how it would impact how they're viewed as men. Boys are more likely to experience injurious co-occurring physical abuse when they are sexually abused. So boys are not only sexually abused, but that is a lot of the times in conjunction with getting physically abused as well. A lot of providers in this particular research believe that boys can't be rape victims. And so this leads to failures to recognize and respond adequately to sexual exploitation. Homophobia is another thing that contributes to professionals' non-responsiveness, with believing that victims only have male offenders, when in fact, women also, to a very lesser degree, are also offenders of child sexual abuse. And then diverse sexual and gender identity is one of these common factors for being expelled from a family home. And then that leads a child to be on the street, and that may lead children to fall into having to have survival sex or having to have sex in order to pay to live. The research also went on to find that there's a higher risk of expulsion from the home due to like sexual or gender diverse young people. This really the targeting of boys by male and females offenders. Again, it talks about boys having this lack of safety in terms of sexual orientation disclosure because of the masculinity related expectations. Sexual and diverse, uh, sexual and gender diverse young people say that homophobic and transphobic intolerance were reasons that they had to leave the home, and also reasons to be hesitant to even approach professionals for services. Authorities may hold the boys, abuse of boys as less serious or harmful in comparison to boys, because they're perceived as stronger or more resilient. So we need to look at our societal norms, and values, making males more stoic, self-reliant, problem solvers, and this contributes to the sexual exploitation of children, boys in particular. Okay, so some of the things in the chat talked about adult attitudes and responsiveness. So we'll be covering some norms and values, which in regards to religious beliefs, stigma, and the fear of promoting sexual activity in children. So if we're talking about sexual activity, then there's like some fearfulness around that. If we're teaching our children about about sexual development, that would somehow encourage them to start to have sex. Religious beliefs is one of the possible barriers to talking to your children or talking to children about sexual education. People in this research stated that parents did not talk to their children about sexual acts. And in fact, when there was a study of some children in a mosque in a Muslim religion, and when they started to have children identify all of their body parts, including their private parts, that the boys were more likely to respond and say what their private parts are. More about 75% of the children, the female children in that age group, either did not respond, did not know what their private parts were called, or actually like looked down and had like some feelings of shame. Both Muslim and Christian participants in this study believe that their religion were more equipped in teaching children modesty and chastity, versus them talking to their children about it. So they said, no, the holy books that we read, they teach how children should respond and be, therefore, they're not at risk of being sexually abused. A lot of the caregivers in this study felt like it was completely unnecessary even to talk to their children about these risks, and that if a kid is morally and religiously devoted, then they could not be a victim. So this is part of that, also that victim blaming. So they're saying that if a child in if they were children and they had come from a religious background, that and if they experienced child sexual abuse, then they were saying that that child is immoral or is a sexual sinner. Okay, so I talked about here, and this is one of the. Oh no, no, this is not. Yes, this is. These are not all Muslims, not all Christians. These are just certain um, um, uh, studies that were talked to by people from religious backgrounds. No, this is not speaking for everyone. Absolutely not, because there are even, this is just some of the possible barriers to that people may have experienced in terms of talking with children about having sex and about protecting themselves from having sex. Like, so this one study said that a self-employed married Christian male, he had no formal education, and he reported that children are taught in the ways of the Lord, that involvement of sexual activities outside of marriage is a sin for both married and single period people, and young ones are taught this and other sins. And so that there's no way that a child can be committed to these things or be a victim of sexual abuse. And again, we're talking about what needs to be involved when a child is being sexually abused. It's that power imbalance, and that perpetrator using that power imbalance for their or others' sexual gratification. Some other things that were reported was something about stigma and mockery. Some parents said that they avoided talking to their discussing sexual issues because they they felt that they would, the kids would start talking about what their parents talked to them about in public, and it would turn them into an object of ridicule or even disgust in their community. Some parents are some parents opt out of teaching their kids about sexual abuse or sexual related behavior, or they wait until a child is maybe going through puberty and may not really think about protecting and talking to young children, about the risk of sexual abuse. So this is specifically, how can we talk to young kids about the risk of and protecting them from sexual abuse and harm. Another one said this fear of promoting, they used the word waywardness in children. So there were some parents who believed that if they taught their children about sex education, that this would lead to an increase in sexual behavior in children. And in fact, the studies show that when we teach children from young to teenage about sexual health and sexual development, that actually leads to a decrease in sexual behavior. And definitely a decrease in maybe harmful sexual behavior for themselves and for other people. And so, but some parents also believe that that when their child has knowledge of it, that it would spark their interest in that immoral sexual behavior. Okay, I have another chat question, and we're close to our halfway mark. In the chat, what are some other reasons why it would be difficult to talk to children openly about their sexual expression? What are some other barriers that may get in the way of talking to the children? I named a couple about religion, culture, stigma. What other things come up? Privacy concerns, yeah. Yeah, not having a good script, right time, right place. Yeah, fear of how others may perceive it. Yeah, being uncomfortable. Yeah, comfort level is huge. Right, with some developmental things about and in fact, children who have disabilities are across the board at higher risk of being abused because they are more dependent on their caregivers. They may feel that their abuse is warranted, that they deserve it. They may not be able to verbally express it to someone else. And they're like very dependent on like maybe one or two a specific caregiver. Some other things, fear of overexposing the child to the subject matter without the right words or tools. Yeah, they might not have a trusting adult to disclose to. That's interesting. No parent of the same sex available. Yes, so in fact, it's that you mentioned that farmer who reported, going out early in the morning and coming home late. He was married to a woman, and he actually said that because he works a lot, that he believes that the education should come from the mother, that he wouldn't even have the words to even talk about that. Yes, and being taught by other adults not to discuss their experience. Yeah, all true, all true. Yeah, and the comfort level of us as caregivers is actually one of the biggest barriers of of preventing child sexual abuse. I'll be talking about some sexual abuse, or excuse me, some body safety programming. And one of the research says that parents are the best teachers of preventing child sexual abuse in children. Yes, sometimes you're right. Sometimes parents think that school should be teaching that topic. And in fact, there are body safety topics in schools. And and also we need to one of the things about it being done in homes is that research says that most of the child sexual abuse occurs either in the home of the child or in the home of the perpetrator. So there are situations where that child may not be at school youth serving organizations are only the second highest risk place where children are sexually abused behind being in their own home or the home of their abuser. Most of the abuse that happens to children, sexual abuse that happens with children, either occurs within their family or someone that their parents know. Only about 20% of child sexual abuse occurs from outside of the home or people like strangers, people that they don't know. Yes, thinking the child is still too young, even though they might be 10. Yes, I was just talking to a parent recently about the parental controls on smartphones. And sometimes we think that we should be having parental controls on smartphones around the age of 10, when in fact, we need to be looking at that as soon as we're giving them access to smartphones and other technology. Okay, so we made it halfway through our training already. A lot of information to digest. We're going to take a brief Leah, should we do 5 minutes, 10-minute break?
Sure, let's do five because we do still have quite a lot of content. So
Okay, so it's 11 right now, so we'll take a 5-minute break to kind of digest that information so far. And then if anything else is coming up for you while we're on the break, please, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat and then I'll address it once we get back. So we'll start again at 11:05. All right, so one of the questions that came up was asking about expanding on genital rubbing as a potential red flag. So while touching one's own genitals is not considered a red flag, but it would be a considered red flag if they were rubbing and trying to touch other people's genitals. So and not only that, if they do that, can it be redirected? Because sometimes a child um uh uh may like look at or touch or point to someone's genitals, but it's the rubbing of someone's genitals. So if that's different. And even if a child is like some children may be curious about their mother's breast and grab their breast, and if that child is redirected again to say this is mama's body or this is your parent's body, and you ask me before you touch it, and they respond, and they're able to be redirected, as opposed to something that is frequent, and they get upset when they're redirected, they get angry when they're redirected. Okay, so we talked about so the risk factors, the scope of the problem, talked about typical and atypical expression. We talked about some of the barriers to adults, in regards to their attitudes, in regards to their responsiveness. And so, given all of that, now we're going to switch and look at some abuse prevention strategies. When we're talking about prevention, child abuse prevention, it's tiered into primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. Primary prevention is focusing on the general population. So just like this training today, so everyone is included, everyone's getting the same information. Secondary prevention strategies are people who have identified risk factors to be abused or risk factors to be perpetrators. And then tertiary prevention strategies could be for providing support to children who have been abused already to help prevent them from being re-victimized, or even perpetrators, programs for perpetrators to stop them from re-offending other people. So when we're looking at primary prevention, these are some things that you can consider in your field. Having social media campaigns, programs that teach children about different topics related to awareness. Posters focus on myths related to child sexual abuse. Encourage parental monitoring and supervision by caregivers. Increasing surveillance in institutions. As we know, children are abused in settings outside of the home, at schools, at community centers. Training our child serving workforces and teaching children their rights in regards to body integrity and autonomy, and strategies for help-seeking behavior. Some others talking about some more mass media to educate kids, guardians, and all members of society. Of course, someone said like using formal education for kids, so it being taught in schools is very important. We will be going over the programming for kids and parents and guardians, and having overarching sexual abuse prevention strategies. For example, in Nigeria, they passed in 2003, they passed the Rights Act. This prohibited child betrothal and forced marriage, and gave children the right to dignity, prohibited unlawful sexual activities with minors, and gave the parents the right to parental protection from sexual abuse. So nations had to very specifically call out this risk of child sexual abuse. Some of the secondary prevention strategies, again, this is talking about at-risk youth. Talks about programs that seek to increase help-seeking behaviors in adolescent girls who were potential victims. Helplines for people who were worried, who themselves were worried about their sexual attraction to victims. So this is not only targeting the risk factors to possible victims, but also to possible perpetrators. And then I already mentioned this, that tertiary intervention. This is like after sexual abuse has occurred. There could be community treatment packages, biological treatments like hormonal agents, like hormonal castration, behavioral treatments like aversion and reconditioning. And then, of course, helping victims and reducing their risk of re-victimization. Child sexual abuse prevention programming or body safety programming needs to have several things to be proven to be effective. These prevention programming that is currently available are aimed at increasing the effectiveness of increasing when parents, the effectiveness of programs increase when the parents collaborate with educators. So there's that transfer of knowledge. So it's about having that relationship with caregivers, professionals and caregivers, having a relationship so that they are consistent in their messaging of body safety. One question here in the chat is some recommendations for supporting caregivers of preschoolers and special ed who engage in genital self-stimulation in the classroom and do not have the receptive language to be redirected. So if we don't have, so can you say a little bit more about that, Leslie?
Sure. I'm referring to a preschooler who is autistic and spends the majority of the day in the classroom, rubbing her genitals on different things throughout the classroom. And the staff has a lot of concerns and are trying to, support maybe like they want to, their typical responses like there is a place for this. You can do this, at home or in your bedroom, there are times and place, but this particular child doesn't have the receptive language to be redirected in that way. I was just curious if you'd experienced similar situations and what guidance you've given to family or school caregivers.
Yeah, so I would be, be talking to the caregivers about how this child soothes themselves, how that child reduces their anxiety, because a lot of times it may be an anxiety reducing behavior. So I would be looking into like other ways to help regulate their emotions. And how can we redirect that to not just stop a behavior, but if a child is doing that, then, I would be curious what the parents would be saying in terms of when that child is upset, how they're soothed, how do the parents soothe them, what is going on at home, and then also developmentally. I would be looking at, because as we know, when our genitals are stimulated, there's pleasure there. And that, so they may be like, oh, I found something that feels good. And they don't have the developmental capacity to understand modesty, privacy, that this is what they're supposed to do in private as they get older. I don't know how old this particular child is. So there may be certain various factors that I would be considering in supporting that family, in helping finding other ways to support emotional regulation in that child. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Some of the uh, education needs to include children being enabling children to distinguish legitimate relationships from inappropriate ones, and because, as we said, a lot of children don't even know that they're involved in a sexually abusive relationship. These prevention programming needs to include online safety for kids. We need to use for children videos, role play, structured exercises, and group discussions. And also, we need to remember that boy victims remain under-supported. So programs and awareness and support need to be, we need to make sure we include boys being possible victims of sexual abuse as well. There was one, as I was preparing for this course, there was one study of these children in preschool. I think they were in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and they were given body pictures of body parts, and they were asked to identify them, and just to be able to have names of the body parts. And a lot of them did not know all of the names of the body parts. They knew the arm, the hand, the head, but when they were given pictures of the breast, they weren't able to, not all of them were able to say what that was, as opposed to like an elbow. Some other formats are in terms of books, which we'll go over there's at least one video in this training that has a book to help do that, but some role play, some scenarios given to children, even some acting in theater about what they would do if someone tried to touch them in their private parts. How would they respond? Just to give them those tools to make it more um, so that they can feel more okay with talking about their private parts. A lot of times as adults, we may tell our children, don't talk about those body parts, that we don't talk about that, but that in fact breeds the possibility of sexual abuse and the lack of disclosure if it does occur. A lot of the prevention programming that has been researched, and four things really stuck out. Or some of the information to include a couple of things. Avoiding harm, really talking about avoiding harm online. We have to be aware that not everyone is who they say they are. So when we hand our kids our technology, we also need to hand them some skills around protecting themselves, telling them to only, instructing them only to accept requests and messages from people that they already know and that they should be blocked and reported. And then what to do when bad things happen to their self and to their friends. So not only being an advocate for themselves, but being an advocate for their peers as well. And how can they spot the signs of someone struggling or having a hard time? One of the prevention programming also includes empathy. Empathy of their in regards to what their peers are going through, because lack of empathy leads to a lack of awareness of a behavior or a turning away of certain behaviors like bullying. And that does not that again decreases the ability for children to feel comfortable in sharing when they have been abused or neglected. It's important when we're looking at prevention programming to teach children and professionals and caregivers that anyone can be a perpetrator. Again, most of the child abusers are someone that the child already knows. We're again talking about social media, that all children and parents need to be aware that the harmful the harms, the risk factors involved of early exposure to social media, the risk of social media grooming, and having supervision of that technology at a very early age. We definitely, as technology has become more readily available to us, we'll give a child, our iPhone or our iPad, as we're doing our caregiving duties in the home. However, we need to be more diligent about making sure that if we are giving our children technology, that they're in the same room with us, that their volume is up so we can hear what's going on. So that we're not in separate rooms, so we're not knowing what the child is doing or what they may be getting into, because online forums is one of the breeding grounds of sexual perpetrators. Right, and a lot of times they tell their friends before they tell their parents. So this is how can we educate our so that education also needs to include, like I said, peer-to-peer. What do we do to protect our friends as well? Education, they found that caregiver involvement is crucial, is necessary, because we need that consistent messaging of body safety education, and then what that should be incorporated in the home. So we should have consistent messaging and engagement between caregivers and parents. And in fact, when caregivers are engaged with, have a good relationship with people who are helping to care for their children, those children are less likely to be suspected to be abused or neglected children. Education should happen in preschools. Preschool-aged children developmentally have the ability to say no. And so we need to utilize that skill in terms of body safety. Really teaching children to listen to their bodies, to validate their body's feelings and functions, and to really teach children about consent at an early age. Even when you're hugging your child, asking them, can I have a hug? and allowing them to say yes or no. That will teach them that they are in charge of their own bodies. One study also said that one of the most common methods for protecting children was to keep them under supervision, keep them away from strangers and unsafe environments, and telling them that no one is allowed to touch their genitals, and that they should scream if that happens. Supervision is one of the main ways to protect children from child sexual abuse. So when we're especially in youth serving settings, is to have not just one teacher, but to have multiple teachers, or if a child is going to a neighbor's house or a friend's house, for them to go with another person, another child, so that they're not by themselves. Those are some of the ways in which we can protect children from child sexual abuse. Okay, so I'll be talking about some of the prevention programming for and what we can do as parents, as professionals, and how we can speak to children directly about protecting themselves. Now we know children are not, because children are a vulnerable population, we're not putting all of the protective skills with children. We are really trying to focus on professionals and caregivers as that beacon of education, and then from that point employing and supporting the children and knowing how to protect themselves, how to find a trusted adult, knowing their body parts and the names of those body parts. The prevention plannings also included, again, they said that that parents should be involved. There's a study in Nigeria. So as we said, this is a worldwide issue. So in Nigeria, they considered parent-child communications as one of the most effective ways to shield young ones from being victims of child abuse, as well as knowledge of the consequences of that crime. In Australia, they use something called the Triple P, or the Positive Parenting Program. This was a home intervention program for kids and their little ones. This program enhanced parental knowledge and skills, increased their competency and self-efficacy. And they said that in Australia and worldwide, because the Triple P is a worldwide parenting program, that parental warmth and engagement have increased, along with creating a safe and engaging environment. So these programs give language to parents and caregivers about how to protect their children from from child sexual abuse, and to increase that body safety. And they also said programs that increased positive child parent interactions, and that helped improve the parent and child relationship dynamics. Again, when a child is feeling safe and secure, they're more likely to report suspected abuse or neglect. We kind of talked about this already, that parents need to, if they're going to give their children access to tablets, we need to make sure that they're properly monitored, keep them in the same room. So make sure the speaker is on, work next to them, or make sure you hear the audio that they're listening to. A lot of times kids will be playing YouTube, and they may be on their headphones, and we may not know what's going on, and this could lead to some victimization. This could lead to them watching something that is outside of their age and developmental status. Check the websites and to see what they can access, and then also seeking out support if you need it. You don't have to be a parent to help a parent. Parents are effective and can be effective educators in preventing child sexual abuse. especially when they have that knowledge and skill to address the issue with their children in an adequate way. This parental prevention programming should also include how parents can prevent accidental injuries. Teaching parents how to deal with what we may consider unacceptable behavior with positive discipline and not punishment. Using education material, demonstrating and helping parents have appropriate strategies in simulated challenging situations, and really having like even role plays with parents to discuss how to talk about sex in a way that is not so uncomfortable for them. We can break the generational traumas that may be experiencing by really supporting parents in being attuned to their child's needs, having realistic expectations, encouraging positive parenting, and really expanding their support systems to include families and friends. This goes on to say about educating parents about using other strategies without using emotional or physical abuse. A lot of maltreatment comes from frustration, from lack of child development knowledge, from stress. All of these can be taught and managed as we're working on the bond of the parent and the child. Working ahead of getting ahead of abuse really reduces that likelihood of sexual abuse. If we're teaching children how to differentiate between, that's good or safe touches or bad and unsafe touches. If we're teaching our children what body parts should not be touched by others, and how to alert trusted adults loudly and immediately if they sense harmful intent. Children have an awareness of harmful intent. Our bodies give us off signals to us. So it's about how can we teach our children to respond to those treatments, and of course not to take candy or other gifts from strangers. So when we're talking about specific programming that includes children, the programming should teach children that they're not to blame for child abuse occurrences, because when we're looking at research, one of the things that we found that children did not disclose abuse or neglect because they felt shame, blame, or guilt that it happened, or they felt that they didn't want to harm the perpetrator or disrupt the family unit. And so if we're teaching children how to escape from these threatening situations, and we increase their social emotional skills, as well as promoting child abuse related knowledge, recognizing risky situations, that will thereby increase their self-esteem. Absolutely, schools play an important role in children's, because most children are attending this youth serving organization. But we do also need to make sure that the teachers and other school staff are able to identify these risk factors and make this information available for all children. So this is a way to reduce the cost of the financial, emotional, and societal costs of child sexual abuse by having body safety educational programming available across the board, across the world. Some research said that children who participate in school-based programs have around body safety have had more knowledge about child sexual abuse, the prevention of child sexual abuse, not just sexual abuse, but all abuse categories. They showed better self-protection skills, and they disclosed abuse more often than children who did not participate in the study. There's a retrospective study, so after the fact of 800 female university students that participated in school-based sexual abuse prevention programming, that they were the females that were involved in those programming had fewer incidents of sexual abuse victimization. We talked about this already, increasing the social emotional skills, which included improving empathy for peers, teaching them to learning to express their emotions, or learning social problem solving skills. And this also included, again, avoiding self-blame and having that realization that that abuse is never a child's fault. Older youth have stated that younger youth need to be taught how to recognize it and how to handle it. And of course, this is again by having not just one trusted adult, but several trusted adults. So it's about asking, either if we're working with kids directly or if we're working with parents of children, really talking to them about how they can support identifying those trusted adults. Is it your auntie, your uncle, grandma? Children should also be taught about their rights. Being taught about consent is key. Having children know that they have ownership of their own bodies is a key factor in preventing child sexual abuse. The more that we talk about sexual development, just like as we talk about other types of development, this breaks that taboo and it makes it easier for children to talk about it. If we use the word talking about a penis or a vagina or a butt, as much as we say hand or elbow or feet, if we make it normative conversation as we're working with children, then that will decrease the stigma of them saying that it's taboo. Okay, so there's in the chat that someone that we use to have a program coming to that uses puppets to talk with the children. It's a great program and got children to share their experiences when they felt unsafe. And it really encouraged children to talk with a safe person when they felt unsafe. Yes, I actually do know about some of these programs, and there I actually put a resource in the slides about programming for adults, or excuse me, for parents and caregivers, and also for professionals and teachers on how they can support having these conversations with children. So yes, the conversations that we have with children are not sit-down conversations like we're having here today. We definitely have to use like play, because that's how children learn. They learn through play and imagery and colors. And so it's how can we integrate those things as we're teaching children about body safety. Educational programs have been found that can lead to less isolation, making kids feel less alone, and saying that other children may experience the same thing. They feel less guilty and more relieved, and then they feel that they're being seen and heard. Research has also proven that if the earlier we have education on these topics, they've reduced self-blame and had a disclosure earlier. Some of the research says that only maybe 5% of disclosures of child sexual abuse happen at the time of the incident, that a lot of times it could take weeks, months, or even years, or not even a disclosure at all. And so if we have these conversations with our little ones, and we talk to our parents about having conversations with their little ones, then if something does happen, we can get a disclosure right away or sooner. The knowledge of could lead to the detection of these child abuse signs, making them feel more supported and providing kids with social safety nets. There has been some research about children just providing this body safety education to only children. That has not proven effective again, because children are not, especially young children, are not responsible for their safety, are not solely responsible for their safety. So it is imperative that we teach adults and adults, both parents, caregivers, and teachers and school staff about this body safety programming, so that we as adults can support the protection and safety of children. Some components that need to be included is the knowledge of all types of abuse and neglect, not just sexual abuse. Children's learning about safe and unsafe secrets, increasing awareness on their personal rights, teaching children to avoid self-blame, learning about their own bodies and boundaries, identifying trusted people, increasing their social emotional skills, i.e. increasing empathy for others. How can we teach children to seek support their peers when they're having a difficult time? Recognizing and avoiding risky situations, increasing the assertiveness skills, learning to go away from the abuse and to find help, increasing child self-esteem, learning skills to self-disclose. There was research done, and parents were saying, oh yes, my child tells me about all the things that happen about their day every day. But what was noted was that they didn't talk that what wasn't talked about was about sexual health. What wasn't discussed were anything to do with their genitals or their breasts or their butt. That was not part of the discussion. So if we do know that children are become aware, explore, and curious throughout the lifespan of their bodies and the bodies of others, but then we also say that that's not discussed as part of their day as when parents are talking to them, then there is a disconnect, because something is happening, because children are being expressive with their bodies. So are we turning a blind eye, or are we not giving them an opportunity to be able to share that? Also providing children with aftercare. Once that information has been disclosed, it should be clear where that child can go and who is available to talk to them. When we're talking about online grooming, this is about gathering information to assess the risk of being caught. Some are testing some groomers, online groomers, test the waters by introducing sexual topics to the conversation with the child. So they may, so this is also not just online, but this is also in person. They may start to, people in person may start to make sexual jokes to a child. Or a person may show a child a nude act, or maybe even show them porn to get them comfortable with seeing that nudity, and so that they can later on exploit them or abuse them. So we do need to be, children do need to know that everyone can be a perpetrator. That it is about protecting their body and their boundaries from everyone. They found that some body safety educational programs and preschool children in particular increased their self-protection abilities that prevented child sexual abuse. Some of the self-protection programming that worked was teaching children to use expressions like no. We do know that children love to say no. So how can we utilize that part of development for them to scream no when when someone is trying to touch them in their genital areas, in their private areas, when no one is around. We have to start early. We were talking about ages and when we should possibly teach children that. And some people say, oh, we'll wait till they're 10. We wait till they're close to puberty. We know that children as early as 2 or 3 are able to understand simple instructions. And so, of course, these instructions need to be simple and age and developmentally appropriate. Some children even, there's one study that pediatricians were given in a hospital study, children were given teddy bears, and those teddy bears were used as the children were pretending to be the caregivers of these teddy bears, and the teacher would instruct would be the doctor, and the teddy bear would be the patient, and they would be the child, and the pediatrician would have like this role play about some of the things that are appropriate to be touched and what places are not to be touched, and how that child would protect the person that they're providing care for, that teddy bear, with safety and security. So again, using toys, things that are familiar and safe and comforting to children when we're providing this education. Because you're right, we don't want to, when we're providing education, we do not want the children to feel fearful. This body safety education is not a fear-based ideology. The body safety programming is really about how can we in a developmentally appropriate way teach children about protecting their bodies, that they have ownership over their bodies, and that they have the permission to say no for a touch that they do not want. All right, some more prevention programming, teaching children early to trust their instincts, that if something feels uncomfortable, find and tell that trusted adult. Also teaching children modesty, your own socially correct behavior, socially, culturally correct behavior. So this is like in representing your own cultural values or the cultural value of that family. They need to know what private part means. A lot of times we may give different words to body parts. We may call the vagina and the penis other things, But when we teach children different words to name their body parts or their private parts in particular, this leads to some confusion when there is a disclosure. Because if there is possible sexual abuse and that child is saying that if they may call like their vagina flower, then when they're reporting to child protective or law enforcement officials, or if they're having like a forensic interview or something, they may be referring back to, oh, my uncle or my aunt or my dad or someone touched my flower. That doesn't that actually leads to a lot of confusion when they're trying to when those officials are trying to investigate those reports. We need to teach our kids the difference between safe and unsafe touching. Parents and caregivers bathe and wash or wipe you, and maybe your siblings or your uncles or your grandparents don't. And if they do, make sure they ask first. And again, teach children that it's okay to say no. So if you go and if you're asking your child for a hug and they say no, we should respond with okay. So then we're teaching them that it's okay to say no and that their boundaries need to be their physical boundaries need to be respected. Okay, so I said I sometimes I get ahead of myself with the slides. Okay, teaching children their body parts, that leads to higher prevention knowledge and better health. Again, children must be told that their bodies and their private parts belong to themselves. So that's pretty basic language about these are your bodies and these are your boundaries and your private parts belong to you. Okay, so I know we're running out of town, so maybe we can just kind of talk about this, either go off mute or put something in the chat. And I think this was something that was mentioned earlier, but this is with a younger child, child of normative development. So if there's a child, we're seeing a child in a preschool setting, they're not potty trained yet, and they're rubbing her diaper against the corner of a table. What are some ways we would go about handling this type of behavior given all the information we have now? How would we redirect that child? What would we say to her? Yes, I like that. Definitely check to see if there's a sign of irritation. I was also, that's one of the things that came into my mind. Like maybe her diaper is maybe her diaper is full. Maybe there's some irritation going going on there. Redirect her in a loving and empathetic way. Like no shaming. Yes, asking. Not all children are verbal, or some children are pre-verbal. So we may not get always get a verbal disclosure of something that could that may be happening. Yes, make her feel safe and loved. Yeah, connect through co-regulation play. Yeah, can you play that? So before you play this, Leah, so this is one book that is available to everyone. It's called My Body Belongs to Me, and this is one a little short video of something that can be integrated with the books that all the other books that are read and to your child in preschool settings and etc. Okay, Leah, we're ready.
Oh, and I'll just mention that the volume on this video is a little low. So if you're having trouble hearing, you might need to increase your volume.
Standing boundaries. I'm Vanessa Barton, and I'm going to be reading a book to you today called My Body Belongs to Me. And this book is about understanding boundaries and knowing what to do if those boundaries are crossed. This book is gentle, it has simple rhymes, and is a great way to send a message to young children that their body is their own. So this is called My Body Belongs to Me. This is my body and it belongs just to me. I have knees and elbows and lots of parts you can see. Other parts I have are not in open view. I call them my private parts. Of course, you have them too. Mom and Dad once told me I was their little gem, and if someone hurt me, to always come to them. One day when we were visiting my Uncle Johnny's house, I was playing with some toys, quiet as a mouse. My uncle's friend came over and sat down next to me and touched me in that place that no one else can see. I got so scared I froze and just stayed where I sat. I thought, this is my body. Why did he do that? He said it was our secret and told me not to tell, but I ran away real fast and then began to yell. I told my mom and dad what had taken place. They said I was really brave and then each kissed my face. Mom and Dad said they were proud. I told them right away. It made me feel better, too. They believed what I had to say. I learned if I was too scared to tell my mom or dad, I could have told my teacher what made me feel so sad. I know it wasn't my fault and I did nothing wrong. This is my body and I'm growing big and strong. The end. Thank you for listening.
So, and this is this book really touched on a lot of the points that we talked about here today. It talked about yelling and running away, telling a trusted adult, and if not that trusted adult, someone else, providing aftercare to that child, parents being responsive and not blaming. So what are some other strategies that you would use when we're talking to children about body safety? What other strategies that you can think of as we're ending our training today? Okay, got some more books here. Puppets, okay. Respecting their pacing, using visuals like drawings, all right. Being aware not to re-traumatize.
Hey, Colette, I remember taking one of these trainings and they mentioned that mentioning that things should not be going into the mouth, other people's body or things, to mention mouths as kind of like included in that sort of, this is my body. And I had never thought of that before. Of course, I did other kinds of like body safety talk, but I never, mentioned mouth.
Like, what do you mean by mouth, Leah? Say again.
Like putting other people's body parts in their mouth.
Oh, right.
Putting
Like
their mouth on other
mouth to genital.
yeah,
Yes.
or like anybody putting anything in their mouth or them putting their mouth on other people. Those were like not okay.
Right. Yeah. So that's that's a really good point. It's like, how can we talk to our children about, like, you're right, like making sure that, like, no one should be inserting something in their mouth. Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
It's
I know it's
also
11:59 right now, but I do want to see if there's any additional questions. I think someone may have their hand up.
well, it's also important. I just wanted to put this in really quick, that we
Okay.
teach our children that even if that person threatens to harm the family members, if they
Oh,
say anything, to just be like, okay, and then tell anyway. Because
right.
sometimes you will get people who will threaten, if you tell mom and dad, I'll hurt them, or
Yes.
I'll hurt your sister.
Yes.
And then they'll stay quiet for that reason.
That's a very good point. Thank you for sharing that. Any other last questions or comments before we wrap up today? Oh, okay. Not to touch other people's body parts as well. Okay, Leah, turning it back over to you. Thank you so much, everyone who attended today. Hopefully you got some good information regarding this. There are some the PowerPoints and some handouts that give us a little bit more of like, okay, so now if I want to find somebody safety training by safety training programming, I did give you some information in your slide deck for that as well. Thank you.
I want to thank Colette for being with us again. We love having you, and we really appreciate you sharing all of this really important knowledge with us. Thank you. And thank everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate you as well. I will be sending out a link to the recording and resources after the event. And I will also be sending out a link to the evaluation, which is where you can download your certificate of participation. All right, I think that's it for everybody, unless there's any last minute questions or anything anybody wants to say. Okay, then. All right, so this will wrap it up. We'll invite you to click your little red leave button, and Colette and I will be just doing a little bit of post-show wrap up. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you so much.